Hello, welcome to Be Open and Authentic with Rohit. Today we have Aditya with us. Aditya is a Googler and he works in a search team and he's a master of search. So, interestingly, in the past few months, if there is anything that has changed drastically in this whole world, there's the notion of search and the impact of GenAI on it, right? And GenAI did not just impact the search; it is just changing the industries in multiple aspects, right? So the change has been so drastic that sometimes it's even scary, right? So I'm just super excited to discuss the topic of search, GenAI, and just how it's going to evolve with Aditya today. So Aditya, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you so much, Rohit. It's great to be back. Yeah, like exciting times ahead in the world of tech and AI in general. And yeah, let's have a nice discussion about it.
Yep, yep. So to be honest, right, in the past few years, I think we have always spoken about the impact of AI on jobs and impact of something else on the jobs and all, right? Nothing felt real until the past few months, particularly with the evolvement of all these LLMs and all these AI based software engineers and things like Sora. They have been just crazy, right? So I can totally see things will change drastically. I'm not sure whether it's in a good in a bad way, but I'm optimistic and I always think it is a good way. So can you tell me your thoughts on how you see how you see GenAI evolving and how you think it will impact the market in general?
I think that's a very great question, Rohit, right? So my thoughts on this subject, right, is that if you read the media, a lot of focus is put on how AI is impacting the world, how AI is impacting jobs, right? But the point is that AI, like anything else, it's just a piece of technology. It's a tool, right? It's yet another tool in our arsenal.
Yeah,
And so it's similar to asking that, okay, now that we have cars, what will happen to all the, horse carriage drivers?
yeah,
Like in my mind they're very similar. Of course the scope is different, right? But the main theory behind it is still the same, that you have a way of doing things, and now there is a new piece of technology which might make some of it obsolete. But the world evolves. The world didn't end 100 years ago, and I am an AI optimist. I don't think the world is going to end right now either. It's just yet another tool which is just going to make our lives better, right? And
yeah.
easier. So this is my whole outlook on the
No, yeah, I agree with you, right? And I'm optimistic as well. But the only, you know, difference this time is going to be, right, because we have seen, with the evolvement of, industrialization, globalization, and also with the cloud, if you talk about, software in particular, evolvement of cloud and blockchain. So most of these had impact on tech in one or the other way, right?
Mhm.
But the pace at which these evolve, particularly in GenAI space, it is so tremendous that I'm not sure whether we all as a community in general will have an option to you know beat the pace, right? So I think the change is going to be super rapid that not everyone will be able to catch up. So I think that's where the whole game of GenAI is going to be, in my opinion.
So let me ask you a question. So you've seen a lot of amazing demos, as you said. You mentioned Sora, right? You must have seen amazing demos from ChatGPT, from Bard, from Gemini. Do you know one thing? Like there is a new industry which has been born out of this advancement, like prompt engineering. Like
Yeah,
you have prompt engineering jobs at OpenAI and other companies. It's
yeah,
because while these systems are really, really amazing and they're very powerful, but what you see in those demos is only achievable by extreme manipulation of prompts. If a regular person were to just put in a random thought in their head,
yeah.
these systems would not work to the extent that people have been led to believe. So just want to point that out. That
Agree.
of course, see, I'm not diminishing that feat of engineering by any means. It's an incredible feat of engineering.
Yeah,
Okay. The ingenuity which went into building these models It's mind boggling, but at the same time, you have to be realistic.
Yeah.
Is it ready to be used by a regular person? I don't think so, right? And so in that and here is where my previous analogy comes into play, that while horse carriage drivers became obsolete, there was a new industry born, which was car drivers, right? And so this is my point with AI, that these models should be treated as tools. Now it might make certain jobs obsolete, or less likely by introducing efficiency where one person can use the tool and do the job of four people.
Yeah.
But I'm sure other industries will come up which haven't existed up until now as a result of these technologies.
Yeah, that is fair, right? So, and I hope that will be the case for sure, right? But the way that I'm, seeing some of the companies use this as a tool of efficiency, right? And compared to the training that they are providing to employees, right? And compared to the just the industry, if you look at just the industry in general, the pace at which companies are trying to utilize it as a tool of efficiency versus the pace of upskilling, there is a huge gap, right? And by the time I think companies really use it as a tool, because companies will invest billions and billions, because that's they can save the return on investment for them is going to be super huge, right? But the pace at which that we all are learning, I think it's not that great, right? And particularly in the whole industry, right? So I just genuinely feel that it is just not enough for all of us. And
Hmm.
particularly if you look at the jobs that will become obsolete, particularly maybe in the offshore or in the support or in certain domains, I think the impact is going to be huge. So that's where I'm particularly saying that I'm just calling out the impact of jobs. Sorry, impact of GenAI on the in particularly for the jobs. But in general, if we just take a step back and talk about GenAI in general, I think that's a great advancement for us in general, right? So
Yes.
I'm just curious to see how this is all going to play out. So I'm just curious to understand your thoughts on how GenAI is going to change the market dynamics in general. So when I say market dynamics, particularly with the new products that are about, right? So with the new possibilities with like Sora or something else, right? So I just want to understand how you view GenAI in the broader landscape.
Yeah, again, a very, very loaded question, right? Because, or rather, a question which evokes a wide variety of opinions,
Yeah.
right? See, Gen AI in some sense, right? The three broad categories, like subcategories within Gen AI. One is text-based generation. The other one would be image generation, and third, which is an extension of it, but will count it separate, which would be video generation,
Yeah.
right? And so these are the three main kinds of models that we've seen over the past couple of years. Now, text-based generation, right? I think the way that these models are trained, right? Like let's say if you interact with ChatGPT, you feel like you are almost talking to a human being, because like the output is grammatically correct, and it can also answer a wide variety of questions. So it feels like you are talking to a very wise person in some sense. Of course, sometimes it totally messes up, but we are not
Yeah.
focusing on those fails, but rather on where it shines. And it's like a lot of people have remarked that chat gpt and other models feel like we have achieved agi, or artificial general intelligence, which is that we have birthed the successor of human intelligence, a machine which is capable of replacing a human in all aspects. While I'm an AI optimist, I don't quite subscribe to that philosophy yet, right? Which is that I don't think it's AGI. In the end, what it's doing is that it's encoded a lot of world knowledge into itself, and it's just great at figuring out what you want. And so it answers with the knowledge embedded within itself. But if you think about it, like these models are not that great at reasoning yet. Of course, a lot of work is being done there. And
Yeah.
so that kind of limits the applications that these models can have currently. Now, if somebody can figure out the reasoning puzzle, that widens the horizons quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
But what it does is that while it is very impressive, these models are kind of similar to a parrot, okay, wherein they have learned, they have read the entire internet, and they can very efficiently regurgitate facts. But if you ask it to come up with something new, they fail horribly because
Yeah.
there's no understanding happening.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, this is still a great tool, okay?
Yeah.
Which is that at least for the things that it knows, where reasoning is not required, more like you just require fact checking, okay? Whereas, like, okay, you're asking it for a fact, it gives you that fact. I think in that sense, these models are great, right?
Agree.
One example would be you might have seen offshoots of chat gpt like lawyer gpt, right? That is one. Like somebody built a wrapper on top of chat gpt where it's like a virtual lawyer, and it's a lot cheaper than actually hiring a lawyer, right? And it gives you the correct information in 99% of cases. But here we run into yet another issue with these models, which is hallucinations.
Yeah.
So for the viewers, hallucination in AI models is when your model is confident in what it's outputting, but it's completely wrong or non-existent. And so that is when model hallucinates the output. And that is really, really dangerous.
Yeah.
The way that these models work, when they generate outputs, they also output probabilities, which is the probability that it thinks that the output is the correct answer. So you could have a situation where for your question, it can output an answer where it is not very sure whether that's the answer or not. And that's great. The model is telling you that, hey, according to me, this is the best answer, but I'm not very sure. My probability is fairly low.
Yeah.
But when the opposite happens, when it's a wrong answer and it says, oh, I'm 100% confident this is the answer,
Yeah.
that's when you run into those issues. And so we still have quite a ways to go to figure out these issues.
Yeah.
But as the models stand, they're great as parents. Like they know a lot. These models have trillions of parameters and they have encoded so much world knowledge in them
Yeah.
that it's quite amazing what we can achieve. Now coming to the other two, right? The the images and the video generation, which go hand in hand. Video generation is just when you're generating a bunch of images,
Mhm.
one after the other that are linked. Now, in my mind, they're an amazing tool for artists, right? Where people can generate amazing art using these tools. And, I have heard complaints from people saying that, oh, if you generate, like AI generated art is not art. If you rely on a machine to generate art, then it's not really art. And to them, I would just pose a simple question. What about photography? People use cameras, and then have you seen editing workflows? Your original photo goes from a very simple and bland photo, and the output is amazing. It's very visually pleasing. Would you call that not an art because it was generated by a machine? I don't think so. So art is art, regardless whether an AI model generates it or it's a photograph or it's a painting, right? The point is that whether it captures the artist's imagination or not. That is what makes it art. And the same thing for videos, right? You must have heard about the writers' strike last year in
Yeah.
Hollywood, including Netflix. And Netflix was experimenting with deploying. I mean, at that point, they were experimenting with deploying a text based model to generate screenplays. And so they're like, okay, what if we can get away with hiring only 10 writers instead of 100, where they would have the model crank out tons of stories and then a few people can go over them and then make some changes, edits, pick the best one. So see, you still require people. Like at the current level, I don't think these models are going to completely make other jobs obsolete, but they can definitely introduce efficiency.
Yeah, exactly. So, and thanks for the detailed explanation and some of the colors as well. So, just coming to your last point, right? So let's say, it, let's take the case of Netflix where it is trying to experiment that instead of 100 writers, just take these 10 writers
Mhm.
and make sure that we can still get the same level of output with combination of Gen AI plus writers. I think that is going to be the pattern that we are going to see across many verticals, right?
Yes.
So, and I'm just super interested to see how that plays out in the software industry in general, right? If you see,
Yes.
there are many jobs, um, right? So which can, I mean, not forget about jobs, right? In particular, if you look at the efficiency of a software engineer with Gen AI in place, it just goes by 5 to 10x or more, depending on how you
Yes.
use it and the kind of job you do. So which means companies can get away with less number of workers, right? So obviously there is a possibility
So,
more and more
sorry,
innovation.
I'll yes. So I'll have to slightly disagree there, and I'll tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you know who Paul Graham is?
Mm-hmm.
Right. He is one of the founders of Y
Y
Combinator.
Combinator, yeah.
Right. If I remember correctly, right, I read one of his tweets a while back where he says that basically code is actually a liability. See, what you want is what the code does. The code itself is actually a liability because it can be prone to bugs, right? See, you have an idea that okay, what are these companies doing? They're trying to solve a problem.
Yep.
It's just that they're using code and computers to solve that problem. Now, what we are arguing is that we now have models that can write code as good as software engineers. That's okay, because that is only part of the puzzle. The
Yep.
larger in the grander scheme of things, it's about identifying a problem in the market,
Yep.
figuring out a solution for that, and then comes the coding part, that okay, now you want to write code which actually solves that problem in the way that you think it would. So if you have a tool, right, a Gen AI tool which solves that, I mean, sure, it will make some software engineers' jobs obsolete, but
Yep.
it's not going to kill software engineering
Oh, no.
industry as a whole,
Yep.
right? Like, say, I just thought of another parallel to the past while we were discussing this. Think about one of the first applications of computers. Like, if you trace its lineage back all the way to Charles Babbage's analytical engine, or even before that, right? You had Blaise Pascal, and he had a calculator. I mean, computers were calculators.
Yep.
The main application came from accounting, right? Those were the first one of the first applications of calculators and computers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before desktops were really a thing, companies would need to hire, I don't know, hundreds, tens to hundreds of accountants to really maintain all the accounts. But with spreadsheets and like ERP softwares like SAP, it's like now probably two accountants can do the job.
Yep.
So this is what I mean. Like, these are just tools. They introduce a lot of efficiency in the system, right? Now, of course, those other people, they're out of a job, but I also have faith in the human ingenuity and imagination.
Yep.
And I mean, of course, there are going to be turbulent times.
Yep.
I don't say I'm not naive, and I don't say that it's not going to be a tough road ahead.
Yep.
But I have also seen AI doomers where like human civilization will end as we know it because of AI and Gen AI. I just don't subscribe to that.
For sure. Yeah. You made a very good point in this, right? So things are going to evolve eventually for good, but there might be some turbulence in between, right?
Yeah.
So my point to you, or my question to you, is like, as an engineer in general, like how can we minimize the turbulence times, right? Or how can we get ahead of the game and make sure that we are deviating a little bit away from it? So do you have any thoughts on how we can better equip
Yes,
our...
I think again a very nice question. So I think the answer to this lies into my previous answer, which is that a lot of software engineers, they approach their job as, like, if you excuse the term, code monkeys. They think that their job is to just write code. That's what I'm saying. Like, actually, what the software engineer's job is not to write code, it is to solve a particular problem using code, right? And so I think for software engineers to really weather out devins and the, devin and the other devins to come, I think it is to really understand, like, how can you solve problems, like designing the solutions rather than focusing on the code itself. And so in that sense it becomes more of a architect job, and or even an entrepreneurial job, wherein you're looking for problems, and then you say, okay, this is where market has a problem. You try to come up with a solution, and then if you use a devin to code up your solution,
Exactly.
it's okay, right? So that's, I think, pure software engineers who just get the architecture handed to them, where their job is to code it out. I think that might become obsolete in the coming few years. So we have to evolve with it.
I agree. Yeah, that's a great point, right? So I think, and not many people put emphasis on it. We are here to solve problems, not just to write
Mm.
the code.
Yep.
And going forward, I think it's NVIDIA CEO who quoted that we don't need to learn coding anymore going forward. And particularly for the kids, right? They don't need to know coding as much as we put emphasis on it. So they need to understand all that stuff, but at the same time, the more
So two
focus
things,
will be on
Rohan.
solving the problems.
Yes. So you're right. You're right. I mean, first of all, like NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen, right? I mean,
Yes.
he's a great showman, right? He has to say that for the
Yeah.
sake of his company. Think of it this way. At one point, like in the early, or rather the later half of the 1990s, when internet took off, right? Everybody was building websites. They were using Java, they were using JavaScript, what have you. And then, in the early 2000s, you had the rise of WYSIWYG, like website builders,
Mm.
where their whole point was, oh, you don't need to learn coding. Okay, you can use our tool, just drag and drop a few things, and voila, your website is ready.
Yeah.
Did that kill the industry of web developers? No, right? So my point is that each of this has its
So
place. Like, there is a market for people who want to solve their problems without writing a single line of code. So these tools will enable those people to do that. I mean, right now they are outsourcing their work to other software engineers. That might take a hit. Like, instead
yeah,
of a 10-person team, they can use these Gen AI tools, get the code, and probably have one person review slash correct it to get it to work. Okay,
exactly.
that is very much likely. But is
Yeah,
it going to lead to a world where kids don't need to learn to code? I don't think so, right? There will always be a
yeah,
few kids, because you'll need the next generation to learn these things, learn how to code, so that they can build the next generation of these tools.
exactly. Yeah. So no, this makes sense, but at the same time, to I think maybe that the extent to which they need to, I think, yeah, they need to understand for sure and dive deep and to be able to code out an application, because end of the day, that is the core of GenAI as well, right? You are writing a bunch
Yes.
of code and which has to work and create the AI models and all. But
Yep.
at the same time, I think the level of code that we write at this point, right, like zillions of lines across industries, I think it will go away, or maybe the code will remain the same, but the people who are writing it, the number will drastically reduce.
Yes.
So I think even the intent of it is right? So learn to solve problems more than focusing on trying to learn coding eventually.
Yes. I mean,
Right?
both, right? Which is that
But
coding is a means to an end.
yeah,
Don't focus just on the, like, on the means, like, right?
sure.
Focus on the end. Like, you have to focus on what problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah. No, yeah, this is a good point, Saitya. So in fact, I think I'm just thinking myself why I'm just focusing on the jobs aspect of Gen AI, where there is so many other things that are happening, right? But I think I've been researching a lot about how the market is going to shift, change, and how we can better evolve even faster than the possibilities, right? So I think that's where all my questions are coming from. But
Okay.
I think I want to deviate a little bit more into the actual GenAI aspect of it, right? Particularly, I want to understand this from you. How is the search gonna change? Particularly for a company like Google, I think it's in a way a great opportunity, but
Yes,
also a drastic hit in some or the other form. So how are you viewing it?
that's again a very interesting question, Rohit. Right? Okay, I'm going to answer it as how I see it. Right? Even though I work in Google search, like my views are of course not the views of Google leadership, because I have no idea what they think about. Right? But see, the way that I think about it is, currently the way that GenAI is currently being used in Google, like Google rolled out the search generative experience a while back, right?
Mm,
uh, there are other companies that also offer similar, um, similar products. Like Perplexity is one which comes to mind. The thing is that what you are asking is more of a product question rather than a technology question,
yeah.
and I'll tell you why. This is yet another tweet that I found on Twitter. In these recent days, there's this actress that has gotten very popular, Sydney Sweeney, right? She appeared in a bunch of films, she appeared on SNL, there was a lot of interest in her.
Mhm.
And somebody pointed out that if you search for Sydney Sweeney on Perplexity, you essentially get the blurb from Wikipedia. Okay, like that's what you get.
Mm,
Whereas if you search for it on Google search, you get tons of features, each of which is doing a different job. You get one images carousel, you get personal details about her, you get what movies she has, worked in, and etc. And in their opinion, that person's opinion, the Google search experience is a lot better than just getting the Wikipedia page of a celebrity. So my point is that this is not a tech problem, it is a product problem. Like, given a query, how do you want, what is the best way of presenting this information to the user? Now, generative AI is a great tool for certain type of queries.
yeah.
Certain type of queries where the answer, there's no right answer, and maybe the answer is spread across different sites. So under the current paradigm, the user would issue that query, they would visit the first page, they would read through it, come back, read the second page, and eventually form their opinion. What generative AI, because right now it is functioning as a summarizer. What it is doing is it is reading those pages and it is generating a nice summary of whatever is contained in those pages. And I think that is a very great application of Gen AI.
Yeah.
And so all I'm saying is that it is, people should not think that it's a hammer in search of nails, right? Where
Mm,
every problem or query can be solved with Gen AI, because it's not.
yeah.
Right? It's like, there for certain type of queries, it makes sense to use Gen AI to summarize results. For certain type of queries, it doesn't make sense to do so. And so I think, as far as I know, that is the approach that Google is taking, right? Which is that it's not a hammer, that you should apply for, that you should, hammer down on all the queries. No.
Yeah. That no, that makes sense, right? But if you also look at um, the type of search that people do uh, on a day-to-day basis, right? So I see it in two ways, right? One is
Hmm.
exploration. For example, if I want to search actor and I want to know more, obviously I would like to see more information. And the other is other categories where I just need the result. No matter where I get from or no matter how it is, I have a certain question and I just want the possible or
Okay.
reasonable answer.
So, sorry, coming to your second part, right? There's actually a deeper problem. It's not
Mhm.
even a technology or a product problem, right? See, up until now, including especially the Google search generative experience. I don't know if you've ever used it, but if you issue a query, it gives you a nice summary, but it also gives you the sources from which that summary was derived,
Yeah,
right? And one big problem here, which I foresee coming in the coming years in this space, is going to be one of attribution.
yeah,
So I don't know if you know, like back in 2017 or 18, like don't quote me on the year, Like there was a lawsuit against Google in Australia where news like websites they sued Google saying that, oh, Google has this site news.google.com where you show our pages. That's nice, but people just read the headlines and they don't visit the page, right? And so I think Google eventually settled the suit by introducing like a subscription based model in Australia. And I
Mhm.
think the same issue, like right now, these companies, they are mining the entirety of web,
Yeah.
right? Now, search engines, and when I say search engines, I especially say Google because it has more than 90% market share, right?
Yeah.
Which is that I see Google search as a window to the web,
Yeah.
which is that the web exists and this is a nice window through which you are looking at the entirety of the web,
Yeah.
right? The thing is that the web has flourished so far, right? But everybody needs to make money.
Yeah.
And so the current model has been you have a website, you hope it's good, you do some SEOing, right? And then when it ranks well on Google search, people visit your website. You can serve a few ads or sell your product, and that's how you would make money. And this
Yeah.
has worked so far. But if you move to a world where none of this ever happens, right? Where you have perplexity plus plus, where all you get is the answer that you're looking for. It's great for the user, but what about the content creators? They
Yeah.
would be like, how do we benefit? Like you used our content to
Mhm.
train your model. So we get into really interesting and difficult intricacies of copyright infringement and trademarking and
Yeah.
IP and so on and so forth, right? And so this is, in my mind, a big barrier to Gen AI. So far, it has worked out by proper attribution. But in my mind, unless this is worked out properly, either by a subscription based model, right, where content creators can license their content to search engines or model creators,
Yeah.
and I don't see how it works out
Yeah. So
even more.
yeah, two aspects to it, right? Which is another thing that I've been thinking a lot about, like how are the business models gonna change,
Yeah.
right? So we'll get that into in a bit, right? But the other aspect of, and we'll also talk about all these attribution differences and all. Let's assume even as of today, right?
Mm.
Just taking the search part in general, you know, to my previous question in terms of where I want to explore more, but that is maybe 10% of it. But 90% of it is I just want the result, right? Maybe
Yes.
that based off my job, maybe the nature of my job, and how I got used to mm, searching the results and all. So I'm just curious to know what the difference, or how is it gonna impact search in general from a Google standpoint or in general, like, because 90% of the time I'm not going to search anymore. I just want the result as is. I know understand attribution and other things are a problem that I'm sure companies will figure out a way, or maybe will new business models will evolve, right? But how you see it as changing, right? So how do you think, let's assume all these problems are solved, so then how do you view the search to be?
Okay. Again, coming back to my one of my previous answers, that is a product decision, right, and not a tech decision. Which is that you can have really nice Gen AI models which can answer your exact query, and if so, then probably you should show that answer. But if your model is not sure, again, I think that's something which I don't have the foggiest idea, right? Because as I said, it's a product decision.
Yeah.
Different companies are going to approach this problem very differently. And it'll
Yeah.
be very interesting to see how it turns out. Like, of course, there will be a few winners, and it'll be nice to see, or rather, it'll be very interesting to see who are those winners a few years down the line.
Yeah.
But at this point, I have no idea. Sorry.
Yeah. No worries. Just want to probe a little bit more. But so to your earlier point, right? So I see this as the biggest problems. Even as of today, I don't think it should not be allowed to learn or to gain knowledge from some other content and not attribute it, right? So which means if I've written a book, then it does nothing to me because someone can summarize it and I don't even know, or I don't even monetize,
Exactly.
right? So similarly, for the content creation, it's for any type of content creation, particularly in the music industry itself is gonna like die if right, if we don't do the attribution properly, right? Because end of the day, I'm just copying, remixing, and I'm an artist by myself at this point, right? So how do you uh, even now it should technically be illegal, or I think there should be laws and some company,
Right.
government doing some things about it, but I haven't seen enough progress. But on the other hand, I see companies like ChatGPT and Perplexity or some others, right? All these LLM models, beneficiaries of all these LLM models, they benefit significantly on some others' work, right? So how do you see this? What do you think is a solution, or how do you see this going to change the game of GenAI?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So, see, until now, these companies have gotten away with doing this, which is that monetizing somebody else's content, shall we say,
Yeah,
right? Or are they monetizing the summarization of somebody else's content?
yeah,
But you're right. I think regulation will catch up to it, and in some sense, it is a required regulation. Otherwise, it kills the content creation industry forever because nobody has any incentive to create content. So, as I said, it in my mind, right? Like one of the most likeliest possibilities would be where content creators license their content, right? Where they allow access to their content in exchange for a royalty or whatever you want to call it. And
mhm,
there's already some precedents there, right? Like Reddit has closed down.
yeah,
I don't know if you know, right? So they have closed down and they are now charging these big companies money to access their data. I think the same thing with Twitter. Twitter has also shut down where you can't just freely scrape off Twitter. You got to pay you got to get a license from Twitter to get their data. And I think you'll see more of this happening
yeah,
because I mean, as everybody knows, data is the new oil, right? Like data is the most valuable thing in the
yeah,
world. And so it doesn't make sense to give away your data freely. I mean,
yeah,
right now they are doing so because they're getting views in return, right? Like search engines are linking to websites, they're getting clicks and eyeballs on their content. But if that is not going to happen in Gen AI landscape, then yeah,
yeah.
that's in my mind that is the most likely solution. Like there are people who will say, "Oh, shut Gen AI down." I don't agree with them. Right? It's not realistic. See, once the genie is out of the bottle, you can't put it back. Okay,
Exactly.
there's
Yeah,
this new technology. It exists. It is revolutionary. You
yeah,
just got to figure out a way to make it work for everybody, rather
yeah.
than saying that ban it outright.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So, no, to your point in terms of the licensing, right? So companies like Reddit and Twitter will put some fee and will only allow certain players to license. But the other problem that I see is people already companies have already mined the data, right? So the data is out there, and LLM models have learned from it. So there is not even a way for us to track back and say, hey, this data is from Twitter, so I need to now get
Yes.
Twitter, right?
So yes and no, right? So
Mhm.
now we come back to one of the points I made earlier that the current LLM models, right? They are they are parrots, and so whatever data they have seen, right, they have learned it, right? But any new data coming in, there's no way for them to generalize,
Yeah.
right? So you often see this with models. You train a model, you ask it a question about something that it has seen in its training data, it
Mhm.
can answer it very well. Then something new happens in the world, and then when you ask about it, it's like, I don't know. Now, of course, there's some work being done to change that landscape. There is this term RAG, which is
Yeah.
retrieval augmented generation, where you're not relying on just the world knowledge encoded within the model. So that is what search generative experience is. It's essentially a RAG.
Yeah.
It first runs Google search, it retrieves the answers using the rest of Google search, and then it generates its answer on top of it. So that always remains up to date with the world.
Yeah.
But again, I think what you have posed very, very interesting questions, and I think questions which are present in almost everyone's minds in this industry.
Yeah.
Now, how it goes from here, that remains to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting because
Yes.
particularly the law has to come into the picture, and it should come sooner than later. And yeah.
Okay,
So
another disclaimer there. The issue with regulation is most regulation is outdated, and if I dare say it, most regulators don't know what they're regulating. I'm sure you remember those disastrous congressional
I know. Oh my.
hearings from Mark Zuckerberg and Sundar Pichai and Tim Cook, right?
Yeah.
It's like some of these congressmen and women and senators, they while they're great politicians, they don't know what they're talking about when it comes to an area as rapidly evolving as
Yeah.
tech and AI and Gen AI. So that's another worry which I always have, which is that I think regulation is required, but
Yeah.
if the wrong regulation comes in, then that is troublesome.
I know. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if you've heard, but the government of India, they recently released a policy saying that if you are releasing a Gen AI model beyond a certain size, like if it has these many parameters, and if it's going to be used for public use, you need to get it approved by the government of India. And that's an appalling thought in my
Mm.
mind.
Yeah.
It's like, who in the government has the expertise or the knowledge to really vet these bleeding edge technology? I don't think anyone.
Yep. Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. That's true. And I know in these sort of scenarios, right? I think EU is little ahead in the game when it comes to regulations. I, I'm not sure whether it's always for the good or
Mm.
the greater outcome, but I've seen that they are ahead of the game to ensure that in the terms of data privacy or you know ensuring that.
Yes. I mean, EU is very, like, they're very trigger happy when it comes to regulation. But my thoughts about regulating bodies still applies there.
I know.
There have been many regulations that have come out of EU, which I think don't make any sense whatsoever. But hey, I mean, that's the law, and you have to abide by the law, at least when you operate in EU.
Exactly. No, that's fair. Cool. And I think this is going to be a whole a new discussion if we get too deep into that.
Yes.
That's not great in my opinion. At the same time, that doesn't add much value at this point for us. Um, so I just want to come back to it a little bit more in terms of how Google is approaching this and what how GenAI is being perceived at Google. Right? For example, the Transformers paper or the transformation architecture paper came in 2017. That is from Google, right? While other companies made significant progress, in my opinion, I think in my personal opinion, at least, Google was little behind and catching up. I
Yes.
I personally thought Google is the obvious winner in this whole game, and I thought that there were no other even close competitors, right? But that doesn't seem to be the case, and things have been changing and evolving rapidly. So I just want to know your thoughts on this.
Again, a very loaded question, right? I don't know how much I can say without getting into trouble. But see, these are my thoughts on the whole subject, right? Google, like as you pointed out, the Transformers paper came out in 2017. It was a revolutionary thing, which essentially, well, it didn't kickstart Gen AI, but it again kickstarted it again, right? Where it's the it's the new and the latest and the greatest.
Yep.
The thing is, when it came out in 2017, like, see, there are two things. Transformer architecture is a piece of software, right? So let's again draw back a parallel to artificial neural networks, right? Artificial neural networks have been around since the 1960s. Okay, but they had significant computational issues, and also, one of the core technologies, which is called back propagation, it wasn't invented yet, which is what made them very efficient, or more efficient than previous implementations. That was invented, I believe, in 1978 by
Mm.
Jeffrey Hinton, who I believe currently works at Google. So he and his team invented backpropagation. But the issue is that you have an amazing idea for software, but if your hardware hasn't caught up, then you won't see widespread usage. And
Yeah.
so while neural like backpropagation was invented in 1978, it wasn't until 1990s and 2000s that neural networks really took off, because computers were just not powerful enough to apply this revolutionary piece of technology at a wide scale. There were only a few toy problems to which they could be used.
Yeah.
In my mind, the same thing is true for Transformers, which is that it was a revolutionary piece of technology, but it was in software, right? And we needed hardware to catch up to a point where it makes sense to, where it's feasible to use these architectures at scale, right? Even then, like Chat GPT, when it launched in, I believe, 2022, right? When they launched their website, each query was like 30 cents. They were like the cost was enormously high. If you scale that up by a billion queries a day, you can just imagine, like, if it costs you $300 million to just serve your model, right, on top of all the other costs, that's an enormous amount of cost. So my point is that you have to wait until the hardware has caught up with software. And I think that happens sometime around 2022, 2023. Like Google has always offered TPUs, tensor processing units, as part of its cloud. But even they completely, I mean, they continuously make improvements to that hardware. But now we are at a place where the hardware has caught up to the software. So that's point number one. Okay.
Mhm.
Point number two is, actually, rather, it's a question to you. Google is one of the most dominant search engines right now, right? Did it invent the technology? Like, was it the first search engine?
No.
No, right? Like, there were many companies before, right? Like Ask Jeeves and Alta Vista, Yahoo, right?
Yeah.
They preceded Google. And so just inventing a new technology doesn't mean that you're always the first, or that the first person to put out, or rather the first company to put out the product always wins.
Yeah.
So history tells us this much, right? And so while you can say that, oh, Google was late to the game, there were other companies like OpenAI and possibly Microsoft which beat it to the punch. I would just say that we are very early into this whole field. And I mean, I'm not claiming that Google will win. I hope it does, since I work there. But we'll see. Like all horses are in the race right now. Like no horse is done right now.
Yeah.
So that's another one. And my final point here would be that it's also a matter of, okay, shall we say, reputation. Now, this is my personal opinion, okay,
Yeah.
which is that when a company like Google, which has more than $120 billion in cash and so many other assets, when it puts out a model which it knows is not perfect, the reputational damage that it takes to that is far greater than a smaller company, or rather a non-profit like OpenAI, doing the same. And in fact, we saw the same thing play out in the demos. So I don't know if you know, like Google released
Yeah.
Bard, right, in answer to
Yeah.
ChatGPT. Apparently, there was a small mistake, right, in one of the answers. It was not even a mistake, right? It was a question which had two different interpretations.
Yeah.
Bard answered one of the interpretations, but people on the internet thought that the other interpretation was more correct. So technically, its answer was correct, but less so than what it could have answered.
Yeah.
And the response to that was swift. I think the stock dropped 5 to 10% in one day.
Yeah.
But what people forget is when OpenAI had its own demo, they also had multiple, there were instances where the model gave incorrect output multiple times.
Yeah.
But back then, people were so enamored by this technology that didn't have any effect on the
Yeah.
company. And so, given all this, okay, I would like to think that it's slightly unfortunate that Google was not the pioneer here, even though it invented the technology. All I can say is that don't count it out just yet. We'll see what the next few years will bring.
I want to ask this particular aspect of how companies are going to adapt Gen AI, right? So if you look at any mid or small to mid-sized companies with decent level of users and decent level of data, they have so many opportunities to build on top of LLM models. So which means they can serve users better, or they can optimize, or they can focus on some level of efficiency by building on top of LLM. So which means they can tie their data with the LLM intelligence in a way. So which will sort of be a RAG based application at this point, and as we know it, right? So
Yeah.
I think how
So
that's,
right. So see, the way that I approach this problem is Gen AI and these LLMs, they're basically a tool of doing one specific job.
yeah,
Okay. So as I alluded to earlier, like you have variants of Chat GPT, like Lawyer GPT, which can act as a virtual lawyer.
yeah,
And so you can definitely use Gen AI to take over or bring efficiency to some of the jobs in your company. Like if your company deals with customers, customer service and customer support could be a great way of using Gen AI. If I remember correctly, there was a dealership in Florida that created a wrapper on ChatGPT, and it basically created a virtual salesman that could actually sell you cars.
yeah,
That being said, a word of caution. I have to temper this,
yeah,
optimism with a word of caution, which is
yeah,
that when it comes to business critical things, relying on just Gen AI and these models can be dangerous. So, in case of that Florida dealership, some person convinced it to sell them a $65,000 car for $1. And they actually went to the dealership to claim it because, I mean, hey, that was their virtual salesman. And so they have to honor it. I mean, I, I, I
yeah,
I don't know what happened. I mean, of course, I don't think the dealership would honor it. But
yeah.
so that is a word of caution, which is that,
No, for sure.
and I think that is even more amplified when your Gen AI system has access to user data. Right?
Hmm.
You have to make sure that privacy guardrails are so strong that it doesn't leak information about some other user to somebody else. But that being said, these are just problems to be solved. Like I'm not saying that this is why it will never work. It's
Yeah,
more like this is why it doesn't work right now. Let's figure out a way to make it work, right?
yeah,
And so I think for smaller companies, what Gen AI will do is that it will bring more efficiency by possibly allowing them to reduce their workforce, right? By having fewer people do the same job with
yeah.
this tool rather than employing more people. And overall, as for the world, I think that's a great thing. Efficiency is always a great thing.
No, that's for sure. So yeah, and along the similar lines, right? For example, if even smaller companies need to adapt, these Gen AI. So my point is that they need someone with Gen AI expertise to solve some of the problems for them. It's not always just a basic API integration and then be done with it, right? So maybe it needs to be trained with some more data, maybe fine tuning. Prompt
Yes.
engineering is a good basic
Yeah, so
starting.
that's one. And
Yeah,
yeah, so coming to the second part, right? Like companies like Google, for example. So Google released its Gemini Pro and
Well,
Ultra models. And if you look up the support page for those models, they offer, I believe they're calling it Gemini Studio. I'm not
mhm.
sure, but it is this website where you can bring in your own data and you can fine tune these large models to suit to your needs.
Yeah.
Right? Where let's say you want to use it, let's say you want to build a chatbot where it uses your data. You can bring your data, you can use that website, and that will fine tune a Gemini Ultra or a Pro model for you to the point where it's directly usable in production. So I think
Mm.
that those are some of the tools that people can learn how to use and then take those skills to these smaller companies that they
Yeah.
can be most useful.
Yeah. Totally makes sense. I think, just understanding some of the foundational work that went into the model and trying to leverage tools like Google Studio or OpenAI has similar tool set like functions and
Yeah.
I think some similar assistant API and some similar set of tools. I think it's more about learning and understanding and finding
Yes.
ways to solve the problem. End of the day, it all comes to which problem are you solving and how are you solving it,
Yes.
right? So I think we are at time, but want to ask you a couple of more questions about
Okay.
how to get into Google. I think so. End of the day, right? So GenAI or beat other innovation, right? So end of the day, it's all about getting a job, and there are many folks who wants to get into Google, right?
Mm.
I don't want to call out, but I'm a pro Googler, right? Not that I work at Google, but I
Right.
want to be able to. That was my passion, before a few years, to be honest, right? So, what is your advice, right? Or what are the few things that I can learn
Mm.
to get into Google, right? Or to put it the other way, how can I clear the software engineering interviews at Google?
Right.
Just to keep it concise.
Fair
Yeah.
enough. So before that, I should just call out that until a few years ago, there was only one job at Google when it came to software engineering. It was just called software engineering.
Yeah.
But because of the rise of all these technologies like cloud and AI and Gen AI, now there are a bit more specialized job profiles at Google. You could be a cloud engineer, you could
Mhm.
be a data scientist, you could be a ML engineer, right? And so, of course, those require more specific domain, like domain specific expertise and knowledge. But as far as the generic software engineering interview goes, my advice to anyone who wishes to crack it, not just at Google, but even at other big tech companies, is get your basics right. Like there are no shortcuts. I've
Yeah.
heard people say that you solve 1,000 lead code questions and that's it. But my point is that, I mean, I do see the value in that. Like by the time you have solved 1,000 lead code questions, you must have developed intuition around how to solve them. And if you've chosen those problems from a wide variety of topics, then you've learned those as well, assuming that you didn't just look up the solution. But in my mind, that is a bit inefficient route. I would say start with your basics, get it right. There are plenty of great books out there. Even if you think you know them, just read these books cover to cover. It's like refreshing your memory, right? Of course, one of the most famous ones is Cracking the Coding Interview. There is another one which I really like. It's called Programming Interviews Exposed. You can find many more such books. They go over the computer science basics, right, which you require in pretty much any job.
Yeah.
Having done that, then you focus on your lead code problems. I can assure you that if you just start with lead code, you'll probably need to solve 1,000 solutions. But if you start with your basics, you'll get the same level of expertise after solving only 50.
Yeah.
Okay, because you know why this works rather than just racking your brain. And
Yeah.
apart from that, when it comes to the actual interview, okay, before the interview, when you apply, try to get a referral. And here is why, right? It's a very unfortunate reality, but these big tech companies, including Google, they get hundreds of thousands of applications every year. It is physically impossible for recruiters to go through each and every application, and so they do look, they do use automatic tools to filter out resumes. And sometimes it so happens that a great resume, because it wasn't written the right way, got filtered out. And so try to get a referral if possible. Reach out to people who work in these companies, including Google, on LinkedIn, Facebook, right? If like look for your alumni network, right? And so if you get a referral, then that increases the chances
Yeah.
of you getting an interview, because some person is going to look at your profile and then decide whether you deserve an interview or not. They can still choose to reject you. That's an unfortunate that would be an unfortunate outcome, but at least it won't be automatically rejected.
Yeah.
Then once you get an interview, right, once you get there, I just want to reiterate a few things here, which is that at least at Google, and I'm sure at other companies, interviewers are looking not whether you know the answer or not. They're more looking about how you think. Of course, knowing the answer helps,
Yeah.
right? But if you go the route of rote learning, and like you've solved a million questions, and so no matter what questions come to you, you just know the answer and like a parrot, that's not great, because interviewers can tell, despite your efforts to hide it, interviewers can tell when you know the solution beforehand. And so in that case, I'll be very honest with you. If a question comes where you know the solution, you should let your interviewer know,
Yeah.
right? You shouldn't try to fake it, like, try to fake think, let me think. No, no, no. After doing hundreds of interviews, I can tell when a person is doing that. Just
Yeah.
tell them it's fine. There's no harm and foul. Okay.
Yeah.
On the other hand, questions are often left vague, and that's by design, because it's supposed to mimic the real world. In your job, when you are given a new project, you will hardly have all the information you require to build out the solution. And it is your job to gather the requirements and then, figure out the trade offs and then design your solution around those. And so the questions are intentionally left vague. And so it is the candidate's job to ask clarifying questions and ask tons of them. I just like to say, when it comes to tech interviews, there are no stupid questions,
Yeah.
because some of those questions are meant to be asked.
Yeah.
And when it comes to actually solving the problem, don't try to do it in your head. Like, try to think out loud, because let's say that you're going around, like you're going on the correct path, but if you're stuck somewhere, your interview can give you a hint. Like, if you get a few hints in an interview, that does not mean that you will not get the job, because
Yeah.
again, the interview is looking for how you approach the problem, how you're thinking, right? And not whether you, I mean, of course, actually solving and writing code correctly for it gives you extra brownie points. I like,
Yeah.
of course, that is the whole point of the interview.
Yeah.
But I have selected candidates who have failed to get at the correct solution, but they were almost there. But because this problem was hard, and I liked the way they thought.
Yeah.
And so just keep that in mind, that if you are unable to finish it, that doesn't automatically mean that you won't be selected. But the job market is competitive. So
Yeah.
it can turn out that you're not selected as well. So don't lose hope. Try again.
Yeah. Yeah. End of the day, just trying to, get the basics right. That is a
Yes.
foundation for a
It's a
software engineer in
foundation.
general, but there's also the
Yes.
foundation for the interviews.
Yes.
And then, with the current competitive market, you have to find your ways to get into the door, right? So in the sense, get a referral or cold email or cold reach outs.
Yes.
But once you get it, learn the interview process a bit more, and then be prepared
Yes.
according to the standards of the company or expectations of the company, right?
Yes.
On these similar lines, and thanks for all these inputs. These are pretty, very valuable. I think I'll end with one last question, right? So just want to understand what it means to be a Googler. I know, because this comes a lot in the interviews, and also this is how people are evaluated as well. But in general, outside of interviews,
Mm.
what do you see it as being Googler?
So I think this question means different things to different people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can only answer what it means,
Sure.
for me to be a Googler. Okay.
Yeah.
For me, it means literally, see, you'll often see this phrase overused in tech, that like companies will often say that we are a company who wants to change the world. And that's true. Many companies have actually changed the world, including Google. And all I can say is that when you work at a company like Google, and for me, since I work in Google search, when I see that the code I write actually runs when, like, Google gets about, I don't even know the exact count these days, it gets like 20 to 30 billion queries every day, okay, worldwide. And the code that I write affects technically every single one of them. It affects most of them negligibly, but when I see that scale, that I have the power to literally change, what people see worldwide, I
Yep.
think that's an immense sense of, like, it evokes an immense sense of responsibility. That,
Yep.
of course, it's a power not to be abused, but on the other hand, it also evokes, like, it is an amazing power, right? Which
It
is
is.
that, wow, it's like, where else can I write code which
Yeah.
will literally touch billions of people's lives?
Yeah.
Very few companies in this world.
Yeah. Yeah. It
That's what
is.
it means to be a Googler, which is that the ability and the chance to improve lives for billions of people in this world.
Yeah. I totally agree, and I think that is one of the primary reasons that I fancied that hey, I want to work at Google. I think that would be my dream job,
Yeah,
right? So I've tried for it, but maybe I haven't tried enough hard enough for it. Right. So, but I'm sure there are millions and millions of people who wants to learn about getting into Google or getting into tech in general, right? But yeah, I think all these inputs from you definitely helps, and yeah, I think that's all I have for today. But most
right.
importantly, I really want to thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts on GenAI and how the search and how things are going to evolve. And I think we should, after a few, maybe after a few months, or after some more advancements, I think we should do a another catch up to see how things change.
Definitely.
I think we made some interesting point in terms of attribution, or how things are going to change, how law will come into the effect, right? So I think we are at just a great intersection. So I'm just super excited to see how things are going to evolve and do another episode with you on how things change. May
Absolutely.
change.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much, Rohit, for inviting me on your podcast. Yeah, it was great talking to you. I think the discussion that we had was certainly very interesting to me, and I'm sure interesting to your viewers as well.
yeah,
And I absolutely hope to do another follow-up episode with you down the line, when like, we made a few projections in this podcast. We'll see how
yeah,
they turn out,
exactly.
and then,
Yeah,
yeah, we'll discuss those developments as well.
exactly. Yeah, sounds good. And thanks for all your expertise and valuable inputs and suggestions. I thank you.
Absolutely.